Goedenavond. Good evening, everyone. Welcome here on behalf of IABR, KeileCollectief and Group A's CARBONLAB. I welcome you to what is the 12th edition of Carbon Stories. For the last 2 years, every 2 months, we got together here in Keilepand to discuss what a designer, developer, builder, constructor, or whatever your role is in the construction sector can play in getting to a CO2 negative, climate positive built environment. Who has been here before? Can I see some hands? Who is here for the first time? Who has attended at least 5 or more editions? Okay, 2 hands means 10 from Saskia van Stijn, I guess. Thank you all for being here. Today we are in the middle of the exhibition, How Do You Want to Build M4H 2030, which spans 200 years of building practice and which has a, you might call, intergenerational approach. And this intergenerational approach we will have tonight as well in our conversation, because we are organizing sort of a clash between generations, a confrontations between, on the one hand, somebody who has been writing peer-reviewed articles on the socioeconomic transition before anyone knew what a transition was, and a number of young transition leaders, Margot, Sam, Sacha, who will each share their own perspective on what the transitions we are facing requires. But before we do that, we will have a short introduction by the director of the International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam. Please welcome Saskia van Stijn.
Lovely. Thank you so much. As said, on behalf of Group A, it was 2 years ago, Volkert, that I sent you this email. Can we collaborate? And here we are. Theory, practice. I don't know. Maybe you are theory, I'm practice. Let's see. I think everything's shifting, which is a good thing to a certain extent. Also here on behalf of KeileCollectief. I don't know where you are, Monica, but thumbs up for all the fantastic work you're doing here. And of course, Willem with the CARBONLAB. My name is Saskia van Stijn, and for 2 years I've been at the helm of a beautiful institution called the International Architecture Biennale. We currently have an exhibition on display at New Institute entitled Nature of Hope. Because on the cusp of all the challenges we are facing, I would dare say on a planetary level, we need some messages of hope. Because the current, let's say, political environment is of course one that is fear-driven, and through the fear-drivenness we get electoral enticement. Just to sort of put the ball there on it. But I'm going to take 7 minutes of your time to talk about scale. Scale of this planetary realization and how we as individuals, as professionals, could, should, would play a role in all of that. Because we know all the stats. We know that things are shifting and that we are facing massive planetary challenges due to our way of life, in essence. So today we talk about CO2, but we could also talk about social cohesion or the conditions in which we, in fact, extract labor, finance, other large questions. And to a certain extent, we are preparing for that unknown future. And of course, the market provides, in this case, sunglasses that will protect you against UV and against heat stress. But we also try to organize on a planetary level, but how to do so? How can we connect to these larger questions, even how to organize the information that we are dealing with? Is it this is the way forward? Potentially, I'm quite holistic as a person, but is it like this, looking at who is already picking up on what? Of course, we're looking at the sustainable, the UN sustainable goals, and I'm trying to make a point on hierarchy and speed here. And for Nature of Hope, we basically looked at the correlation between the biosphere, between society and economy. In the IPCC reports, it says we need to invest in biodiversity, then things will scale up. And this is one of the projects that I wanted to hint at. It is by a research collective called MOLD, partially based in the UK, partially in Vienna, Austria, where the work is called Architecture as Climate, or Architecture is Climate. We're still debating about the title. But it shows basically the footprint. So the white part is the historic diagram. of the amount of CO2 production, and the black part are all the words, very Jenksian. It was also made in collaboration with the Jenks Foundation. For those of you who do not know who that is, a famous and notorious architecture historian. And the words on top, economy, labor, policy, extraction, culture, infrastructure, are of course what we are as a profession deeply rooted in. And the words speak for themselves. I wanted to also mention this question that we're in this together. So we are as a profession, of course, for 38% responsible, but a new actor is this global friction, which is now 6% responsible, the eco side, for the emission of greenhouse gases. So how can we think through models of peace that we can reconnect to and still be hopeful in, again, a sort of planetary distress? And I'm sure our keynote speaker will talk about that. But I wanted to address two things. It's how to connect as a person to this global scale. I'm a product of the 80s and 90s, and we talked about acid rain, and we talked about the ozone layer, and in fact, well, acid rain we don't address so much, and the ozone layer is actually closing due to jurisdiction on a planetary level. So we have to keep faith that it can be done. And it can be done through this notion of imagination. I'm a big fan of Mr. Walt Disney because he, as no other, is a storyteller. So imagination is one of his quotes, is the model of which reality is built. And we are here with all these talented faces that could, and people could potentially give us these new points on the horizons, these imaginaries that we can use as guidance. And I want to talk about conversation and the spectacle to a certain extent. For those of you, of course, in the know, the society of the spectacle, it's like, how do we get our story out there? And I'm extremely honored to have all of you here to reflect on what we will hear tonight, because to me it is about getting our stories out there, because alternatives are there. We just need to somehow overpass or overturn the dominant narratives that I started off with. So I apologize for our keynote speakers, and again, I'm very honored that we both have the intergenerational, but of course, the master of excellence when it comes to transition thinking. But what if we learn from Taylor Swift, who yesterday endorsed Kamala Harris? 300,000 people that will actually somehow be influenced. So I hope with all of you here we can touch at least another 100 people, because on the scale of the individual we just need to touch a lot of other people and then start this critical mass that we're all longing for, and the shifts that could go with that. I'll keep it at that. A very warm welcome here at Keilepand, and enjoy the evening. Back to you.
Thanks, Saskia. What transitions are we talking about when talking about the sector you all work in? What do these transitions demand, and how do we speed things up? That are the three questions we will focus on tonight. And the first guest I'm going to ask to the stage is known as the Taylor Swift of the transition research sector. He was, in the 80s, one of the driving forces behind the climate models such as the IPCC is still using now. He published more than 30 books, 300 articles, but he also established a big reputation when it comes to tirelessly bringing sustainability and transitions research to a wider audience, whether it's giving lectures throughout the country or joining the more conservative right-wing talk show tables such as the one Johan Derksen is hosting. It's an honor to have him here for the next 30 minutes. Please welcome Professor Dr. Ingenieur Jan Rotmans.
Thank you very much for the kind words. I hope I can live up to these expectations. I think so. I brought with me a compelling, sweeping story with, especially for you, some new elements. The reason that I'm here is that I really admire Volkert as a pioneer. Originally I couldn't come, but especially for him, I'm here. So I devote my new story to him. I have three pillars underlying my story. First of all, I was asked to sketch the challenge for the building sector. Secondly, what do we demand or need? And then I focus on the mental aspects of a transition, in particular for the young people around, that hopefully they won't make the same mistakes as I've done during my career. And then I round off with inspiring examples of my hometown, Rotterdam. So enjoy, fasten your seatbelts. It's the kind of a perfect storm that's coming over you. I hope I can read it from a distance. My latest books were all bestsellers, and my son says, now the people, they know it. But there's a difference between knowing and understanding. And in between knowing and understanding is the deep feeling, which I am also tipping upon. My latest book was called The Perfect Storm. And this is the right or the wrong direction, I think. This is not my presentation. So this is the kind of chaos I would like to avoid. Can somebody help me? Because I thought the middle...
Als je heel even wacht, zetten ze hem klaar voor je daar. En dan
Ja.
komt hij op het juiste...
Okay. So it wasn't my fault, or it was both of us.
Absolutely wasn't your fault.
Okay.
Maybe you can tell a personal story.
Pardon?
Maybe you can tell a personal story in between.
No. I'm saved by the bell. The story will be personal anyhow. So, yeah, first part, the challenge, in particular for the building sector. Well, do I need to talk about the weather? Even tonight, it sounds and looks like a perfect storm. I started my career almost 40 years ago at RIVM, a nice institute. I developed the very first integrated climate model that has been developed over the past couple of years and have been used in all climate negotiations. But when I started my career, we were very, very concerned about the future of nature. Now, not anymore. Nature will survive in one way or another. Now we are deeply concerned about the future of ourselves. The future of human beings is at stake. Nature will survive, is more resilient and agile than we. If we are agile and resilient enough, that is the question. So that is the transformative shift that I noticed during my career. It looks like if we are part of a semi-permanent crisis for many reasons. If you look back 20 years, the financial crisis, the migration crisis that comes as a boomerang on our board, the corona crisis, energy, climate, nature, all these crises get bigger and more complex. If we keep on destroying nature, then nature will destroy ourselves. So my first advice to the organizers is don't focus on carbon. It sounds nice, carbon stories, but climate change is not the most imminent problem that we have. The most imminent problem is the problem of loss of biodiversity, the nature crisis, which is even deeper and complex than climate change. But I did my PhD on climate change 34 years ago. I did not get cum laude, my committee said, fascinating research, but perhaps the problem might not exist in the future. Different times. Why am I optimistic? Because from a complex systems perspective, I consider this crisis as a blessing in disguise. 90% of our behavior is ordinary, customized behavior. So if we are learning, we learn from crisis. And then we see a pattern that has been empirically validated in many, many ways, that after each systemic crisis, a small part of people is really transforming, 5–10%. But it's cumulative, so it adds on after each crisis until you reach the tipping point, and that is between 20, 25, 30%. So you don't need 50% of the people, because it's a highly nonlinear exponential curve you are in. So if you have reached a quarter of the people, the remaining part goes relatively fast. Relatively, for the young people, might take another 1 or 2 generations. Small example, When I started my career, there were hardly any solar panels on the roofs of houses. 0.5%. Now it's almost 30%. And we are going up to 75, 80%. But then we need to solve, let's say, the structural problems we have with our electricity grid. But that's a different story. So the reason why I spend so much time on transitions is that they are fascinating. I still hardly understand the core of it, because there are so many buttons you need to push. It's not the same as ordinary change. We are talking about transformative, radical, sweeping change. So it's not the same as replacing gasoline cars by electric cars. Otherwise, we stand in, let's say, longer rows with cars, but a little more clean. So it's also not the same as substituting fossil fuels by renewables. That's only a small part. It's about politics, it's about geopolitics, it's about behavior, it's about, let's say, the underlying systemic change. It's about everything simultaneously. And that makes it fascinating. And to bring it down to the core, it is really thinking different in a different mode, organizing in a different mode, and doing in a different mode. Oh, that went too far. And after all these years, they are embedded, but you cannot force to let people think in a different mode. It needs to come down, let's say, from the inner side. So thinking differently is really the most difficult, but also the most challenging part of a transition. And when I started my career, there was hardly any attention. So literally, when I started doing transition research at RIVM, my first director said, I'm afraid of transitions because it might lead to a different power position of our institute, RIVM, so please stop with the research. But because I'm stubborn, I, let's say, well, maintained that for 8 years, and then I went to Maastricht University, and then my rector magnificus was Job Cohen, and he said, Jan, could you explain what a transition is? So I spent 10 years on explaining why it was necessary, 10 years on what it was, and the remaining part on the how. The younger people here start with the how. That's relatively easy. But look at this. They are all around. It's about energy, resources, circularity, agriculture, the spatial transition. But these goes really at my heart. Healthcare, education, the social one, and the mother of all transitions, the democratic one. In 20 years from now, we have 2 million people who are 80 plus. Some of them are in the room, including myself, perhaps, if I'm lucky. And they have all kinds of chronic diseases. In 20 years from now, only 60% of the people work. In 20 years from now, 1 out of 3 working people needs to work in the healthcare sector. How are we going to fix this? This is only one example of the real transformative notions that underlie all these transitions. So again, this is not ordinary change, transformative change. You can never do this in 1 or 2 years. You can never do that in 1 generation, not even in 2. There are 3 buttons to push. First, policy, that's highly overrated. A little more than 50% of the policies is never implemented for many reasons. Technological innovation and behavior. Behavior is most underrated because social norms play an important role in what we are accepting and how we are changing. When I started my career, it was a little bit odd to have solar panels or do sustainable things. You were called in Dutch a sustainable gekkie. You were a little bit crazy. And now it becomes more and more the norm. So social norms, what we find acceptable, play a predominant role in transitions. But we focus mostly on the technological side, also this evening, and I don't like that, So I focus on the mental side tonight, and we focus on the policy side, and that's mostly is that disappointing. Now I zoom into the building sector. And I have a love and hate relation with the building sector. For more than 25 years, I have tried to influence the building sector. Not really successfully, to be frank. Completely dominated by men, in particular elder men of 60 plus, in blue or gray suits, but I'll come back to that. What is the challenge? Well, the point is the building sector produces about 10-15% of the CO2 emission in the Netherlands. That depends if you include all the transport or not, but let's say 10-15%. The latest 5 years we have seen hardly any reduction because we have a high stimulus to build new buildings and houses. So the speed of CO2 reduction needs to be doubled or tripled. However, my optimism arises from the fact that the last 5 years I have seen penetrating in the building sector all kind of young people, a little bit old, weird people like myself when I started, and they are really influencing the culture and the structure of the sector. I come back to that in a minute. Oops. Is it? I don't do anything wrong, or do I? Or do I need to point in a different direction?
Maybe they could do it by hand. There it was. Yeah. It's working.
It's working now? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well, will the building sector achieve the climate goals? And here comes my normal statement. I usually bet on a bottle of whiskey for almost 100% sure. No, they won't. The building sector needs to reduce 55% CO2 in the next 6 years. And with the current speed of CO2 reduction, we will get to 10, 15, 20%. And I'm involved in many building projects, and I'm invited when there is a new spectacular, circular, sustainable building, and then there's a lot to celebrate, and then they gave me the floor for a couple of minutes, and I say, why are you really celebrating? You should be concerned about it. But that is not really what I taste. Will the Netherlands anyhow achieve the goals? Well, we never ever have achieved the climate goal. That is, well, you can cynically say, well, that is quite an achievement. But we are pointing to other countries that they need to achieve their climate goals. That is typically Dutch. We never ever achieved the climate goal, but we are stumbling forward and getting closer. We won't reach the 55%, but we can go up to 45-50%. And now an insight, especially for the younger people. 25 years ago, we started with the project, the energy transition. And for the very first time, we had a long-term CO2 reduction goal. And then we said if we could reduce the CO2 emissions by 50% in 2050, that would be a great achievement. And we thought that time that it would be impossible. We are going to realize that. So what we see is that we're raising the bars and that we are getting more and more ambitious, but that we still won't reach those goals. At the level of the universe, do we achieve the climate goals? No, no, no. 1.5 degrees is unfeasible. For the last 14 months, we have already exceeded the 1.5 degrees. And that would literally mean that we would stop now with the burning of fossil fuels. All of them. 2 degrees would mean that within 10 years we would stop burning fossil fuel. And that's also not going to happen. But we are heading for 2.5, 3 degrees Celsius, which is really, really serious. even the difference between 2 and 1.5 degrees is already quite significant. That is the difference between still having living coral or not, or still having ice at the North Pole or not. But, again, when I started doing climate research, we were afraid of 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees Celsius. And because all the things that happened and all the measures and all the policies and all the changes in behavior, we have avoided that. That's the good news. And also tonight, I think, it's our mission, it's our duty, it's our task to fight for every 10th of degree. That is worthwhile. And that holds for each and everybody for us. It makes a difference, fighting for every 10th of degree. Now I dive into the building sector. And I was quite astonished when I started working there. How traditional can you be? How inward-oriented can you be? How masculine? Hardly any women around. It's getting better now, but still. And the practice was for a long time still based on the lowest price. So this is the most crazy schedule for a sector that I have ever seen. I cannot explain it to my children. I cannot explain it to anyone. I'm sorry it's in Dutch, because I couldn't translate this one. But you see in all the other sectors that the distance between, let's say, well, the client and the user or the contractor is getting closer. Look at the parties who deal with all the aspects in the building sector. It's crazy. And as long as we do not change this one, because the user has hardly any influence on what finally will be built. We can do much better. If you would do it in a circular way, that's already more natural than we are doing now. We have at the project level many fascinating examples. And that's exactly what the building sector is celebrating always. So there are thousands of projects, and I will show some of them later on, which are good, striking examples. But not at the sectoral level. It is not scaling up. And that has a lot to do with what I call change inertia in the sector, and that is deeply rooted in the culture, in the structure, and in the daily practices. So we need cultural change. We need different people. We need different working. We need different parties. When I look into other sectors, there are social psychologists working, studying the behavior of clients. When I'm talking with a building company and I ask, how many social psychologists do you have here? They say, no. Why do we need them? We have technicians and managers. But if you want to have a central place for the end user, you need to know something more about the behavior of it. Why are there so little health specialists or cross-thinkers, friskijkers, dwarsdenkers, like I used to say in Dutch? We need different parties. I'm still waiting for the major disruptors that really shake up the building sector, and it is a matter of time before that will happen. But this is an important point I would like to make. Social norms are important to change the building sector. So it's not about technology. There's quite a lot of technological innovation. And it's also not about policies. It's about culture, it's about mentality, it's about social norms. Let me give an example. I studied the tendering procedures in the Netherlands, in particular for the building sector, and in more than 50% of the tendering procedures, sustainability is not key. Only in 35–40% it plays a central role. So sustainable tendering should become the social norm. And now it comes. In 5 years from now, if you, as a client or contractor, do not put sustainability central in the tendering process, you are considered a loser. That is really a driving force behind transitions. That we correct each other and say, okay, this kind of tendering procedure, I'm not going to, let's say, comply with it and enter this one because it's not about sustainability or circularity. And I often make the, let's say, comparison with smoking. If I would have stood here 40 years ago, you probably all would have smoked. And the social norm was then, if you don't smoke, then you are not part of the group. You are isolating yourself. That has changed over the last 2 generations. If you are now smoking, pardon, but you are kind of a loser. No. That is really one of the engines behind transition. So, one of my recommendations for you is, first, do not focus on the building, because that's what we usually do, but on the built environment. Secondly, do not focus on CO2, because that's not the most important problem, but on sustainability and circularity. Do not focus on the material aspects, but on people. It's all about people living in harmony, are supposed to live in harmony with material aspects. So the overall challenges are enormous. We focus on new buildings and houses, but the transformation of the existing is much more important. Renovating and transforming what there is. That's 95% of what there is. Sustainability, circularity, digitization, without gas. The current speed is, well, let me put it differently. If we want to achieve the climate goals, we need to decouple every day 2,000 existing houses from the gas. 2,000 per day. The current speed is between 10 and 20 houses per day. This is a beautiful example. It's a nice building designed by Thomas Rauw in Duiven. It's used by Alliander. It's the renaissance of an existing building. Each material has its own passport. It's energy neutral. Nature, by the way, is not energy neutral. Nature does not even know what it is. Energy neutral is nothing. Nature is energy positive. But let's say 80% of the old building was used. But now my point comes, we have 1 million buildings in the Netherlands, 1 million buildings. 50 of them are circular. 50. And each time we are celebrating that. Another circular building. Bio-based building, that's fascinating. Over the last 5 years I've seen that emerging in a quite spectacular way. And I'm really adherent to that. I'm a big fan and supporter. I'm supporting Jan Willem van der Groep and Norbert Schotte in their building balance effort, bringing together builders and farmers and form coalitions. An example. Let's suppose that we would build 1 million new houses. That generates an enormous amount of CO2, 55 megaton. That's about a quarter of what we produce in total. If we would do that by biomass or wood, then we would save, let's say, at least 10% CO2, because it's a double sink. First of all, you avoid using concrete, and secondly, it really stores CO2. But then you need fiber crops like flax or hemp and lisdodder, miscanthus. That gives a new business model to farmers, but also builders. So it is really emerging. We have tens and tens of projects, in particular in the northern and eastern part. And I really hope it breaks through. And this is my little advertising for one of the most exciting tribes in the building sector, the Gideon's tribe. 2.5 years ago, I founded that together with Norbert Schotte and Jan Willem van der Groep and joined them because it's fun. And that's also one of my advices to the young people. Don't make it too heavy. Don't forget about the transition fun. The second part, I think, is especially oriented toward the young people. What do we need? What do we demand? First of all, a mental shift. And I'm frank and open-minded here. Transitions take at least 2 generations. If you are impatient, you better leave the game. No, really. And I have been impatient myself. I was a typical front runner. But urgency is something different than hurrying. Keep that in mind. If you are lying in bed tonight, try to keep that in mind. I feel the urgency deep down in myself. But I lost the feeling of hurrying up, because then you are going to make mistakes and then you are increasing the resistance. So what you need is perseverance, courage and guts. Ballen op z'n Rotterdams. But you also need strategic skills, which I missed myself. Because I was a typical front runner running into the wall. So you need a plan and a strategy, not a fixed goal, because while you are maneuvering, the goals are changing. It's a goal-searching process. But you also need to be agile and resilient, and it's a long path with many disappointments and many pitfalls and many barriers. So what we need is empathic, strategic thinkers, but also doers. Not only thinkers, not only doers, but thinkers who do things. So we need new leaders that can think in a highly systemic manner, but also doing things according to a deeply personal conviction. And perhaps this is my most important overall advice: thinking big, doing small. Not thinking big and doing big. Because too many people have tried that, and that's a recipe for failure. Thinking big, doing small. And it sounds so simple, but for people who feel the urgency but are hurrying up too much, this is the most difficult thing. Let me give an example. I started with Team Next, and some of the team members sit here, like Tijmen and Yuri and John de Vos. And we started with a circular campus in order to train and educate young talented people for the circular economy. And we didn't start with a big bang, but we started from bottom up with 25 young people. And we founded it ourselves, and Volkert provided us here with a place. It took us about 3-4 years in preparation, but we started in a highly modest way, and we are trying to scale it up step by step. Thinking big, because the underlying idea is really ambitious, doing it in a small way. Don't do it on your own. I've been trying myself. That was really discouraging. Be conscious of what kind of change maker you are, and search change makers that have complementary properties, and creating a transition team of 3-5 people. But never ever be part of, let's say, a strategic board, or what we call een klankbordgroep of regiegroep. Don't do it. It's a waste of your time. A waste of your time. Step out of it. It's only meant to delay a transition. What kind of change maker you are? Well, I asked myself that question only 20 years ago. That was a bit late. You have front runners, like I was, but they are substance driven, but they do not bind. They are part of the, let's say, penguins, and they step out and the rest of the penguins is going through. And you need topplers, kantelaars, system breakers who can act in the most strategic way. Connectors. Connectors are very important because, let's say, front runners need connectors. We need builders, but also demolishers. I hope that they are in the room, demolishers, who break down things. Because we have the tendency to build up things on and on and on. But we also need to stop with things. We need to break them down. That might be rules, institutions, norms, whatever, and followers. So small groups of 3, 4, 5 people with complementary competences might be quite successful. This is also intriguing. My own daughter did her PhD on social innovation under the guidance of Professor Henk Voorberda. And one of her results was that if you are successful as a human being or company, then 3/4 of the success is due to social innovation. Trying to make people more smart, trying to make them more agile, trying to make the organization more innovative. And what do? We focus on technical innovation. 90% of the budget goes to technical innovation. Well, the biggest part of the success is due to the social innovation. This is also important. Try to enjoy it. Try to really enjoy the resistance. For about 15 years, I had no resistance at all. Well, I can assure you that's quite boring. Then you are meaningless. If you have no resistance, nobody takes you seriously. So resistance is the beginning of contact. Without resistance, you are meaningless. So try to investigate what kind of resistance that is. Is it about you as a person? Is it about group resistance? Is it about, let's say, technical resistance? Or you have 5, 6, 7 different kinds of resistance. This is also what I've learned. Try to zoom in and zoom out. So if you zoom in, everything goes incredibly slowly. My gosh. I've been advisor for the Rotterdam port for more than 20 years. In 20 years, we have reduced the CO2 emission now by 20%. And we have about 20 sustainable projects now, 20 years. So my children say, Dad, wasn't it a waste of time? No. What you have built up in 115 years, you cannot break down in 20, 25 years. So you need to zoom out in order to see the real changes. So I try to do that every week, every month, every year. And I call that Kairos time, according to a very nice book of the philosopher Joke Hamse. Take your Kairos time. The Chronos time challenges us and chases us, but the Kairos time is the time you need for yourself in order to develop yourself. And I also, in the spirit of Yuri and many other people, are going through my spiritual quest. I learned that there's a whole gap between knowing and really understanding, and that's the feeling. If you feel the urgency, and I've been myself at the South Pole and the North Pole, and then you see what we do with nature, and then you feel the ultimate connection with nature, and that is something you never forget. And that had more impact than thousands of the books I read about it. And I call this a new form of consciousness, an integral form of consciousness. And I'm pleading for a new kind of, let's say, activism. And not so much the classical form of activism that is also needed, but more from a deeper level of consciousness. Activistic spirituality. Be a little bit kind for yourself and reward yourself. I sometimes was very harsh for myself, but I've seen so many people who got into problems with a burnout or a depression or even worse. Even some people committed suicide, and that's not worth it. Try to be a little kind for yourself. If you are trying to do things differently, and I've been doing that for all my career, then you feel the pain in your body. I literally feel that pain in my body now, and you feel it in your mind. But you are already courageous if you're doing it literally different. I'm going to round off with some, let's say, inspiring examples, in particular in Rotterdam, my hometown. And I'm going through it very quickly. I started 20 years ago with the first visions for the old harbor areas, the Rijnhaven and the Merwevierhaven. And the Rijnhaven, we had a big idea because all the new buildings were spectacular, but it was a dead area. It was not a very living, thriving area. So we had the first animations to make it more green, that green and blue became the pillars. And now it is being implemented in a different way, I show you. But we also had that. I'm partly responsible together with Duravermeer. In Rotterdam we called it the natte ballen, the floating farm. And it's now placed close at the RDM campus. But the whole idea was, if the sea level is rising, the water is literally directly rising in the old harbor areas because it's an open connection with the North Sea. So it's better to move with the tides than in order to heighten the case every 10 years. So that was the idea. And then we thought about floating houses, floating swimming pools, floating markets, floating houses here. And this is what you see now. And this is the kind of animation for the next couple of 5 years. It's not the same, but it comes close. And my message to the young people is that took 20 years. 20 years. Because all kind of bureaucrats, let's say, they merge with it and it goes from one department to the other and there's a lot of protest and resistance. But you need a long breath. And they even think about a swimming part of it and a kind of a beach. And we started simultaneously with the Mer en Vierhavens, where we are located now. And I called that vision van woestijn naar goudmijn, from desert to gold mine. And literally 20 years ago, and Volker can support that, it was a desert. Op zijn Rotterdam, je zou er niet doodgevonden willen worden. Toen. And we had two ideas. We start with a free state of pioneers and artists and, let's say, entrepreneurs. And then we make the shift to a more oasis. So we literally had exercises with designers and architects in order to fill up the area in a very evolutionary manner and make it green and use the water in order to develop around the water and on the water. And yeah, we did that exercise on and on and on. And we did some simulations with, let's say, well, self-sufficiency with regard to food. This is also a part of the circular economy, reusing electronics. Here we see the kind of entrepreneurs living and working there in some odd buildings, but let's say fascinating. And then in the second part we thought we are more working on an oasis where families might enter, where it is more in harmony with nature, and we did the same kind of exercises in order to fill this up. And water and green were really the primary drivers behind the development. And here it looks a little bit more nice and attractive. And this is exactly, I think, what is going to happen. But this is literally what we designed. Here we go back 2005, almost 20 years ago, until 2040. And of course, we are running out of time because it's not going so fast as we thought. But see what is possible in order to make this happen. You need 20 of those Volkers in order to make this happen. Courageous people in all kinds of sectors. But ultimately, that's my message to the young people, it will happen, but in a different way than you might think. And yeah, you need a long breath, and you need patience, and you need perseverance. So we called it the Green Machine. Organic development, providing space, giving directions, a vibrant mix of masculinity, rawness, beauty, and harmony. And then water and green central, and a living lab for sustainable innovations for elsewhere in Rotterdam. And that is now exactly happening. The next couple of years, and I promise in 10 years from now, you really would want to live and work here. And we ended up the last 5-6 years with some animations, how we could live together with the water and the green, moving with the tide again, because that's the ultimate challenge for Rotterdam. And you see here another beautiful animation made by Kuiper Architects at the Vanilla Fabriek. I hope it will be implemented in this kind of way. This is another picture, 25 years old. And when the right-wing party saw this, at the time of Pim Fortuyn, he himself started laughing. Ah, the crazy guy Rotmans with the sheep on the roofs. That should be forbidden, he said. But look at this picture. Rotterdam is greening. I show you in a minute. It has many advantages, also with regard to climate adaptation. We are the greenest city in the Netherlands, and we are the most climate adaptive city in Europe and even in the world. This is another example of a green roof here, of course, close by in the Merwe-Vierhaven. Well, a fascinating new building, the Sawa building, made by TBI. Of course, here also in this area, the floating farm. Crazy idea, but it goes all over the world. And it might be, let's say, an incentive for all other delta areas to do the same. And next to this, let's say, well, a floating greenhouse will come. In spite of all the resistance there is, we have 12 floating houses in the Nassau Haven. We have a floating restaurant and a building in the Rijnhaven. We have water squares in order to store all the water, because the water intensity is growing exponentially. We've seen that also tonight. Water reservoirs. I always take students with me and I show this, and they don't know about this. They really don't know about climate adaptation and how we are working on this. And this is the good news also. In the next 10 years, Rotterdam gets 8 new parks. 8 new parks. In the Rijnhaven, Prins Alexanderplein, but also in the Hofbogenpark, Westblaak, Schouwburgplein. Wow. If I would have thought that 25, 30 years ago, well, that would be really difficult to imagine. I'm closing now. It all stands or falls with leadership, but not ordinary leadership. We need authentic and connecting leadership. Give me one example of a well-known Dutch politician who is really authentic and connective. Difficult, eh? Perhaps Peter Omtzigt, but he is sick again, and that says something. But there's a lack of leaders, and I'm entering many boardrooms like Yuri, and I see chaos, I see fear in the eyes. I see fear in the eyes because they find all kinds of excuses. They do a step back now. They say, Jan, it's difficult with the pressure of stakeholders, shareholders, with the inconsistency of the policymakers. But these are all excuses. The real leaders do not take a step back. The real leaders go against the flow, and they take unpopular decisions. But who are the real leaders? Perhaps there's more leadership here in the room than in The Hague at the political arena. I spoke with a well-known CEO of one of the greatest banks in the Netherlands. I shouldn't name him, but you can imagine. And I spoke with him, and he was really regretful. He said, Jan, I'm sorry, because I did not do everything what I could have done. I should have pushed more the edges of what was possible, and yet be even more ambitious. And I do blame myself for that. You would not want to end like this. This is really regretful. So one of my key messages is, don't look up. According to the movie, don't look up, because if you look up, there's hardly any leadership that we need. Start to look into yourself. Try to do what you can. And the time of excuses is behind us. There are no excuses anymore after all these decades. All these systemic transitions require a transition in ourselves. And a large part of my story went about that, the personal transition, to overcome the basic fear that we have for these transformative changes. Because from evolution we can learn that if it gets difficult and we are confronted with transformative change, then we think the situation gets worse for us and not better. So we need to hard work on that in order to overcome that. And well, this is my point. I became a granddad last year, and that does something with you. Because she will ask, in 5 or 10 years. Granddad, what did you do in order to secure my future? Can you give some specific things that you have been doing in order to color the world a little more beautiful? So, and your children might ask the same, or your grandchildren. Where were you when it really mattered in the Netherlands and the world? And when our future was determined, what did you do? And what is your answer then? Do you have an answer? At least I think I have an answer. If it is a satisfying one, I don't know. But I have a kind of an answer. But I know so many people who don't have an answer. And that's regretful. I'm rounding off. There was a debate yesterday. That was also a bit disappointing. But let's say with a hopeful end. But this was the youngest and one of the most ambitious American president ever. And he put the importance of nature on the agenda. He really implemented the natural parks like Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon. He said, we are in disconnection with nature, we need to work hard on that. And he spoke 115 years ago the magic words, the men in the arena. I call it the men or the women in the arena. Somebody approached me lately and said, I'm neither a man or a woman. Okay, I don't care, but it is a different time now. He said literally, step into the arena, do something, do not wait. Because otherwise, your children and grandchildren will ask, well, read them literally. They are so topical, these words. It's not the critic that counts. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, but who does strive to the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm and great devotion, and who with any luck tries the triumph of success, and who, when things go wrong, and if he or she fails, at least had shown great courage. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jan. It's a lot to take in, a lot to digest. We will hold on with your questions for the discussion. We will have later on, if that's okay with you. And if it's okay with you, I would like to give the floor to the three future leaders. But for now, I'll give it up one more time for Jan Rotmans.
Thank you.
And we will check out whether it's correct that a lot of is expected from the younger generation, and whether Jan is right when he's very hopeful about your contributions and your contributions as well. I thought Margot was scheduled first, but Sam's perfect for me as well. He graduated in 2020, I guess, right, Sam? 29 years old. He will zoom in on what the transition to a sustainable construction world requires from a large contracting firm and its team. And he is the sustainability advisor at the earlier called Duurhavenmeer. Please welcome to the stage, Sam van Hooff.
Thanks. We have the... Hi everyone. So it's so great to be here as a man in a blue suit working in the construction sector. So thank you for that introduction, Jan. No, it's an honor to speak to you all today. I'm going to tell you something about our transition, but mostly about how we find it very difficult. So I work at Duurhavenmeer. Duurhavenmeer is a large company. I work at one part of it, and I'm a sustainability advisor. And we have many challenges in changing to become a more sustainable contractor. But I'm sure many of you have challenges in changing your company or changing yourself. So I'd like you to take 1 minute of my precious speaking time to talk to your neighbor and to formulate your biggest challenge. And so you get 60 seconds right now, and I'm dying to hear what is it. So there you go.
Nou, kom maar op.
So what's your biggest challenge? Wat is je grootste uitdaging?
Nou, ik wil zoveel mogelijk mensen inspireren.
Okay, almost ready? Okay. Who has a neighbor with a really interesting problem? Come on. You. Who has a neighbor with a really interesting sustainability transition? Oh, you. Well, tell me.
Materials.
Materials. Why?
Because,
We enter in a new phase, geopolitics, deglobalization. So the scarcity of particular metals and minerals, and maybe also some building materials going forward.
Anyone else? No challenges? Okay, well, I've got some for you. I'm going to talk to you about 3 of our main challenges right now. A data management challenge, an organizational challenge, change that we have, and a sectoral change that we need to make. And I included some great pictures of projects, circular projects that we should absolutely not celebrate, but we are doing it a little bit. So the first challenge that I'd like to talk to you about is the data challenge. So I read this great statistic on LinkedIn, which means it's probably not true, which says all of sustainability managers, 50% of them, they get caught up in data management instead of doing the actual work. I'm sure that it's a lot higher than 50%. We're right in the middle of it, and this is exactly what we're experiencing. We're telling everyone, okay, we should become a more sustainable company, and then everyone says, but how sustainable are we exactly? We should measure that. So we spent 2 years measuring that, and now we know exactly how unsustainable or how sustainable we are. And what have we done in those 2 years? Well, we have worked very hard, but our CO2 hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. So we really need to know how much CO2 we reduce. Or do we? You know, if you work in construction, everyone can name the top 5 materials that emit a lot of CO2. So we can start right away. We don't need to keep measuring, because this measuring will go on and on and on, and it never ends. In 2 years we're going to have different regulations, so it never ends. And then there's, how do we measure? And when are we successful? Are we successful if we reach the 1.5 climate degrees? We just learned that we can't, so we are constantly changing our goals and figuring out how we should set them. And then we are, of course, bringing that into our own organization. So what tools do we need? And do we need to develop our own tools? And the tools are changing. So we are constantly adapting to a changing landscape of tools and regulations. So that's our first big challenge. Our second challenge is the people. So how do we change the hearts and minds of our colleagues? And I've heard a lot of people talk about, okay, we have to change the entire company and everybody has to think sustainable and everybody has to eat vegan. You try a lot of contractors to eat vegan. Good luck. So how do we do that? Do we hold lots of workshops, or do we get lots of lectures, or do we have Jan Rotmans come and a lot of other innovative speakers to tell us how it's done? So yes, we are trying that, of course, but we cannot change everyone at the same time, and we cannot change everyone's values at the same time, but we don't need to. I think we need to start with a small group of enthusiasts. So that's what we're doing and trying right now in various parts of our company, starting small with the group of enthusiasts, and they are supported, and they have these think tanks, so things pop up, and then we celebrate our little victories. And well, this is one of them. So we're trying to do it that way, and I think it's working. But you know, we are not changing everyone's hearts and minds at the same time. It takes time, and my personal challenge in this is that, you know, once you enter the world of construction as a young person, I'm 29. I'm working with people not only from my own company but from other companies. They have been in construction for over 30 years, and suddenly we're telling them how it should be done. Yeah, that's a tough conversation sometimes. So that is a challenge personally for me, and I'm sure lots of young people might recognize that. And our last challenge is changing the sector. So as a contractor, sometimes we build our own projects and we develop our own projects, but a lot of the time we are actually dependent on our clients and what they want and what they desire, and also of our subcontractors. What can they offer us, and how How can we use their sustainable materials when they're too pricey, or when things have not quite yet been figured out? And they need us to try it, but we need them to give us the guarantees and tell us it's okay, because we need to deliver and we need to make a building that stands. So we have in this supply chain of construction, as Jan just sketched, it's very traditional and it's very from A to B. But once you get everyone together in the same room from the start, so once you start designing with a demolitioner, and we actually tried that in one project, and it was amazing because they had all these ideas about how we should build the building so that it could be demolished again. And that changed our whole design, and it changed the entire project actually. And it was so interesting to see, but it's only possible if you get the demolitioner at the table from the beginning. So we really need to get the decision makers at the beginning, the developers, to do these kinds of things. So how do we get our clients to ask us the right questions? That is also our challenge, We are not always steering. We are working sometimes for housing corporations. They are on a tight budget. How can we get them to ask us the right questions? So these are our biggest challenges. How do we change into those together? But there's many more, of course. So, we're focusing on bio-based materials, but we are also dealing with the fire safety of it and prejudice about that. There's uncertainty about innovative, sustainable products. And what if our clients don't even want to go for the sustainable option? These are some of the things. And my question to you is, who do you need to help you solve your most difficult challenge? So I'd like you to take another couple seconds and talk with your neighbor about who you need to help you with your challenge. But that concludes my talk. Thank you.
Indeed, take some time to reflect upon this and dive in during the discussion later on. Next in line is, if I'm correct, Margot. Yeah, she graduated in 2020 as well at TU Delft and immediately founded More Studio, where they transform vacant or inefficient buildings into net positive landmarks that produce more than they consume. Please welcome to the stage, Margot Holländer.
All right, good evening. So my name is Margot Holländer and I am one of the co-founders of More Studio. More Studio is an architecture and engineering firm, and we are focused on sustainable transformations, meaning we want to take vacant or inefficient buildings and make functions that we really need, such as housing. And this is my business card. It says sustainability engineer. What I mean with that is that I like to look at how we construct things and how we construct them sustainably, and also to quantify our environmental impact of the project in the beginning to know where we're heading, in between, and then again at the end to see if we actually reach those goals. What is the end of a project is also a good question, but that's a topic for another talk, I guess. We are 3 co-founders at More Studio, and this is us at our office in the Koolhaven here in Rotterdam, in the building called De Machinist. And what we started with is this question: could we solve both of these really big challenges in the Netherlands at the same time? Can we take inefficient and vacant buildings and transform them into housings that we really, really need? We need around 1 million homes. I'm sure you've heard that before 2030. That's a big challenge. And I think the construction industry has already deemed that near impossible. So around 100,000 homes per year, that's approximately the goal we're going for. And what we want to contribute to is this 10% that we know is possible to provide homes by transforming existing buildings. If you can do that in a very sustainable way, and that's what we're focusing on, you could save around 130,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is, to give you a picture of how much that is, because it doesn't look that large in this graph, is what I realized. But it's around the same amount that all these 100,000 homes or households that we would build every year, as much as all those people use for their transport, their food, and their consumer products all year round. So it is a really, really big amount that we're talking about here, and we really want to contribute to that. In our first transformation project, I'm happy to say that we're already within the Paris Agreement goals, the Paris Agreement 2030. We're still sort of training towards Paris 2050, because you can see that we're not within those boundaries yet, but we're working hard to achieve that. And what's funny is that we did a project a while ago, so not the one that I just referred to, but a one before that is even more sustainable than what we achieved now. But that was a prototype. So yeah, the topic of today is from theory to practice. A prototype is something in between theory and practice. This prototype was actually made during our student time. It was not just us, but a bigger group of students handing in this competition entry for the Solar Decathlon Europe 2019. And this was actually a cutout of the Marconi Towers, which are close by here. I'm sure you maybe biked past them today. And what we showcased here is the transformation of a corner apartment of those towers. So we replicated this corner and performed that really sustainable transformation. Yeah, but sustainability is not enough. Our goal back then, and our goal nowadays still, is net positivity. So we believe in something that I'm sure a lot of people would think is impossible, that buildings can give back more to their surroundings than they take away from it. So what we're trying to achieve is better air quality, cleaner water, more energy generated from renewable sources than one building itself needs, and CO2 negativity, for example, and less waste. So we built this prototype, and we won a world record amount of awards with it. This is what it looks like from the inside. On the left-hand side, you see the actual Marconi Towers. On the right-hand side is the prototype filled with an immense amount of interesting technology, high-tech, low-tech. Yeah, so this was a really good test. And then immediately we stepped out of university and into the construction market and or building sector, and looked at how to do the same thing, but then under real market conditions. So taking a really large building and transforming that. And we stepped straight into a building that didn't just have any budget, but that of a social housing project. So that was a huge challenge. This is the project. It's called Baobab and is located in Utrecht, part of a plot called De Kwekerij. And it used to be a data center that was vacant for 15 years and is now transformed into over 200 student apartments. So next month is actually going to be opened. It's been a long journey for us at least, but we're happy to say that it's worked out. So this is the building from the outside. It's going to have one of the largest solar facades in Europe. And from the inside is, this is what it looks like. We tried to keep intervention really minimal, so being really mindful of materials, of emissions, but also to create spaces that are really livable for the students, obviously. Yeah, so we still have to see how that building performs, but we're so far really happy with the progress that we've made. But now what we want to focus on is just the larger scale. So finding all these vacant buildings in our cities is not that easy. There's not just an open list where you can check for vacant buildings, but we've by now found a way to contact building owners, for example, and get in contact with them, with municipalities, with developers, especially the good kind of developer that we actually want to work with within these projects. And we also understood that we cannot do it alone, and that's why we are currently collaborating with industry partners such as the suppliers and the builders. For example, here in our new initiative called Transformatieloket, we're collaborating with Respace and the New Makers. They are two suppliers of timber products that are CNC milled, and they really have the same mindset as we have, and we are trying to speed up the process of transforming even more buildings into sustainable living environments, and doing it on a really large, meaningful scale.
Thank you so much, Margot. Last speaker in line tonight is the youngest speaker tonight, I think, and maybe the youngest speaker in the history of Carbon Stories. 23 years old. He works on integrating the value of biogenic storage into the financial models you use in your sector, defining the requirements and conditions in which carbon credits can act as a true accelerator instead of an alibi for the prolongation of defunct business and productions models. That's a mouthful. I welcome to the stage Sacha Brons.
Wow, what an honor to share the stage with such inspiring people. I will focus in my talk contributing to this discussion and talking about two concepts: the role of young people and the role of new ideas. And specifically, the new idea I'll put forward is the value of carbon, which I will be discussing. But first, a little bit about myself. I'm 23. I'm actually still a student. I study political economy after I finished environmental science as a bachelor. But simultaneously, I am now head of construction stored carbon at the Climate Cleanup Foundation. I work for the national program that Jan Willem highlighted, Building Balance, as a carbon storage accelerator. I tried to find fancy words in English for it as well. And also, as you can see here, I started a farming business with 3 friends. And this November, we will be planting 20,000 trees in Elst, close to Arnhem, really doing it in practice. And you might be wondering, like, how does a student become head of a department in a foundation? How does that work? Well, it has everything to do with the Climate Cleanup Foundation. It's a non-hierarchical organization. It's a band or a movement of people reversing climate change. And doing that with a new idea. At least at that time it was new. And that is, we don't need to just remove or reduce emissions. We need to remove them from the atmosphere, and we need to do that with nature. And we do that in 4 domains, and I am then head of constructions. And to get you to think in this way, I have brought with me an analogy. So please pretend that, or think about Jan Rotmans trying to go and take a bath. What does he do? He turns the tap on, and then, like everyone else of us, he walks away, and then 30 minutes later, oh fuck, my bath. So he runs to the bathroom, runs upstairs, and there he finds the tap is running, the floor is totally flooded. He has a problem. What's the first thing that he does, or that he should do? He should close the tap. First thing. What's the second thing he needs to do? He needs to pull the plug on the bath. He needs to mop the floor, clean up the mess that he made. And I think that's the way that I like to refer to it. You need to first close the tap and then also clean up your mess. And the same goes for carbon in the atmosphere. But what you see happening in practice over the last 20, 25 years, you see these people with big baths and they pump a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. You have some others doing a little bit as well, some that are not. And instead of closing the tap, you say, no, the tap, it's too hard to close. Let's pay other people to close their taps, and then we can just keep on doing what we're doing. And there's 3 problems with that. The first problem is, as you can see, the tap is still on, it's still running. The second problem, the bath is already flooded. As Jan showed in his analysis, we're already beyond these thresholds for climate breakdown. And the last one is a little bit more nuanced, but you don't really know when someone's going to take a bath. So, in terms of this emission compensation and carbon credits, which I'm talking about, it's quite hard to know if someone actually is going to emit. So what we do, we're very smart, we in the blue bath, we make up that someone is going to be emitting, and then we can buy them out, and we've compensated our emissions. But as you can see, nothing has happened. So what we need to do is close the taps. Close all the taps, maybe even throw out some baths, throw out some organizations. And the ones that are left, they should actually remove from the atmosphere what they are emitting. And the interesting thing is we can also have organizations, baths, that only remove CO2. But for me, with my background, this is a bit more like too managerial, like just managing flows of carbon. In the nature of tonight in Transitions, I want to show you that this is actually the same thing as what the European Green Deal calls the transition to a circular bioeconomy. So circular bioeconomy means everything, all the resources we use, They either come from reuse or they come from the land, so the green tub, from forests, from the land, from farmers, where actual plants remove CO2. This is, for me, this is exciting to work on, because bio-based construction helps the transition towards a circular bioeconomy. Jan touched upon it. This is, I think, a nice graph to show it. Of course, bio-based materials, they reduce emissions. Very nice. But we can go a step further. Under the surface, you see that the potential to also store carbon is potentially even much higher. And today, in legislation, in finance, this below the surface storage, nothing is being done with it. And that was the new idea that we had with Climate Cleanup is, what if we give this value? And then comes the personal aspect. I was told, just go fly, go discuss with people, learn from people. I got thrown into the Gideon's tribe with, yes, it's a great idea to join it. I got to speak to all the pioneers in Dutch construction, in bio-based construction. What do you need? What are the challenges? Can we get this to have value? And see where you end up, was what I was given as a mandate. And well, I ended up at the European Commission, actually. And as a student, remember, I advised them on how to implement biogenic carbon storage and the value that it should have. And actually in 2026, we will have a European policy system where biogenic carbon storage will be an asset. You have certificates for your building that show how much carbon you store. You can use that for your green claims. You can use that for your corporate sustainability reporting. You can connect it to the energy performance labels of your buildings. And then in the real world, in not only the policy world, it can be connected to the asset value of your real estate. It can be connected to public subsidies and funding, and then to other companies wanting to invest in your building. You can have voluntary or even compliance markets for carbon. And if they work in a good way, within sustainability boundaries, we can actually massively accelerate this transition towards those materials you see over there, the bio-based materials. And that's why maybe I'm even more optimistic than Jan. So I think my three main takeaways is first, trust the youth, and if you think of yourself as youth, or if not, maybe do think of yourself as youth, trust yourself as well, take that stage. So I think the time is over for symbolic stages for young people and they have good ideas. No, put them at the forefront of that important business meeting, let them fly and see what happens. And then secondly, in these transitions with these new ideas, I can see that I have so much agency because these structures are not thought out. They're new ideas, so anyone with critical or creative ideas, they matter. That's, I think, something that gives me so much hope. And then the final thing connected to the organizations I work for, this Gideon's Tribe, the Climate Cleanup Foundation, I have a positive niche where I know that I am supported, just like Jan said. And also, I haven't talked about it now, but my food forest, it's just one single place where I can see every tree that I plant has effect. And then the effect it can have on inspiring people is even larger than I now can dream of. So I hope that you follow my path and let's together get that transition rolling even faster than Jan thinks is possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And join us on stage for a conversation. Yeah, we'll bring out the chairs. There's a lot we can do, a lot I want to do, but we have 25 minutes remaining, so I want to focus on giving you the floor to ask questions to our four speakers tonight. But before we do that, I want to know from you what you take home from the message Jan sent and brought here tonight. And I want to know from Jan what he takes home from your three talks. Please welcome to the stage our guests again with a big applause. Jan, you're already wired. If I may start with you, how did you listen to the three talks you just heard?
Well, I was impressed and inspired the way they communicate. Also the originality, sometimes naivety. But if I compare them with their young age in the 20s with myself, they are absolutely ahead.
Okay,
But
what were you doing when you were 23 and 29?
Well, I was partying, I was doing a lot of sports. It was not that heavy. I was working on my PhD, but these people are doing, and that's a different time. They start their own company, they start their own initiative. When I was in the 20s, that was not really usual to do that. There were hardly any startups or scale-ups or whatever. You were supposed to start working for multinationals or big national institutes like RIVM. So I enjoyed it, but I also think that they need a kind of mentorship. You might say, go fly. Well, I can provide you with 10 different pitfalls based upon you can, let's say, break down. So don't ignore the kind of knowledge that we have built up as, let's say, more experienced people. And that's part of my legacy, to help people like you. You are inspiring me. But for instance, if you want to try to change an organization like Dura Vermeer, and I've been trying myself a couple of times, you need a kind of a plan and a strategy. You cannot only do that based on intuition. You ask many, many questions, but not really answers. So you see my point, and there's a whole, let's say, gold mine of knowledge that we have in order to, let's say, in order to be successful. Not a guarantee, but try to profit from the experiences of other people. So I enjoy the energy, the atmosphere. Also, you with your own company and scaling up, there's a whole kind of experience with how you can scale up, not so much technically, but also organizationally and institutionally. And I was really impressed by your, and Norbert warned me, by your story. It's a great story, but it goes far beyond simply doing. You cannot only do that based on energy and intuition. There's really a serious risk that you might fail. Because the bigger the idea becomes, the more resistance you will get. Starting something is not so difficult, but implementing it and becoming a part of the, let's say, regime, that is the most difficult part. So the first 5 years are relatively easy, but then it really starts. And what is then your plan and strategy?
Margot, let's start with you. What, in an attempt to answer maybe the last question Jan just gave us, and what do you take home by the perspective he shared with us and the perspectives of the other two speakers tonight?
Can you hear this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not happy to hear that the first 5 years are the easy years, because I'm experiencing something very different. No, that's a joke. But what's our plan? Well, we have a strategy to collaborate with people who are already in the market. So those might be companies that are that have existed for multiple decades, or companies like I mentioned at the end of the presentation that have existed for maybe 5 to 10 years. So they've already settled more into the market. They also have some connections to, or they understand better how the, let's call it, political system within the building market works. Yeah. So, and also just, we are doing, but I don't think we're really rushing ahead too much. I do think that we're taking one step at a time, because that's just how you have to do it in the construction industry. As you said, nothing goes very fast. So, yeah, we're taking one step at a time, doing one project after the other, and trying to learn from every project.
Would you say, Margot, that this is part of a sort of strategic plan to make sure you make as much impact as possible, or change as much as fast as you can?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, trying to change as much as fast as we can, but then in a way that, like, yeah, for every project that we do, we want to be able to replicate that. So I don't think that the goal is to make the one project that is uniquely the most sustainable project in the Netherlands or in Europe or something like that. But we're trying to do it in a way that is actually accessible for everybody. So that's why we find it really interesting to work in the affordable sector, for example. So yes, making impact, but making impact in a sustainable, if you use that word in a different way, in a way that it actually you can sustain it.
Yeah. Some, Jan just briefly mentioned changing Duur over Meer. Is that what they pay you for? Are you in the bill to change the company?
I'm not sure they know that yet, but yes, they do.
Okay.
No, yes, yeah.
You started a couple of years ago and then you left, right? Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, I actually left because, and that's one of the things I'm taking home with me, because it's patience. Because at the beginning of my career, I started working, and then I left because I thought it just was going way too slow. And I figured I'm going to work somewhere at the forefront of sustainability, because this is probably going nowhere.
Mm-hmm. They didn't even have a sustainability office or something like that, right?
No, there was not a plan yet. And then yes, change can go slow, but it can also be going quite fast, because they actually surprised me by how fast change was being implemented, and sustainability managers started popping around and implementing strategies and doing projects and things. So I kind of had to come back, because I figured, change can happen, and you know, changing a large company by 1% might actually be a smarter move than changing a really small company by 10%. And I figured that was the interesting thing to do. And the other thing I'm taking home, I think, is fun. I see a lot of young people my age and trying to change the world, and we are burying ourselves in it. It is terrible. People are having climate anxiety, and people are really fearing for their future. But changing is fun, and we should, I think, embrace that and take that home with us as well. So I'm taking that.
Yeah, I like that, because you are privileged to work on that change, and don't make it too heavy. If you are in the 20s, that is your most joyful period of your life, because at that time you don't have too many responsibilities. If you become 30, 40, 50, it gets heavier and tougher. But this is the time of your life. You're doing already courageous work. You are inspiring other people. So, and my son-in-law, Norbert Schotter, he had already 3 jobs in 5 years, because he's so impatient. And
which is a bad or a good thing in this case?
I don't think it's a good thing,
okay.
Because they start working within building companies, and if it's not going fast enough, they leave. But what do you leave behind then? Because then you go to another company, and then it's also go slowly. So it is disappointment after disappointment, but this, don't make it too heavy. Don't take the world on your shoulders.
Sacha, if I recall correctly, you were the one during the pre-meeting that coined the term transitieplezier for me. How does transition fun look like for you, and what do you take home after tonight?
Well, I think sustainability for me, growing up, has just been a given. So it's like living in a climate crisis is just, okay, that's reality. And then I have no pain of, this is what we lost. And it's just, I mean, I know that, and I've been taught that a lot. But now it's just about regaining, and it feels kind of free. And I think similar, the mental transition also is kind of freeing for me, because there's no perfect role model that I have to fit. I don't have to be Jan Rotmans. I don't have to be you. There needs to be a shift in mindset, and that means that there's also many roles for me open for the taking, and really maybe inventing new roles in transition.
Before we dive into the audience, I have one question for the both of you. You studied at TU Delft, graduated in 2020. Would you say that the environment where you enjoyed your studies was filled with the notion that we had to change the world in a radical way, or were you educated in what Jan would call the fossil era?
Yeah, so this is interesting. When we were graduating, sustainability was being taught to us in the way that we should put lots of solar panels on our buildings, and we could draw a heat pump somewhere, and then it would be really sustainable. But it was fine if it was all concrete and a glass facade and everything. You don't get away with that anymore. So the education system and the construction sector are usually the slowest sectors to change, but in this case they really changed very, very quickly. wood construction and CLT construction is the norm now in education that I see. So that has rapidly changed. I don't know how you experienced it.
What did you study?
Architecture.
Architecture, exactly. So I studied building technology, and I have heard this opinion before by people who studied architecture at the same time as I studied building technology. BT was really very sustainability focused because it's a much more technical field, and we're trying to, figure out the building physics and of a building, for example, or what structural material is really the best. And we did work with programs that plot on a chart how far does a component have to be transported, what kind of structural material would be best for which span, and so on. And we're probably already boring some of you, but this is what we learned, and that's what we were interested in. So I think it depends per field.
Yeah, but you're actually saying that you are ahead of architecture, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, Jan?
But for these talented people, the education system is quite boring. They are already ahead. I'm from the TU Delft. I studied mathematics. At the time, you cannot even imagine that the word sustainability was not there. It's from 1986, so it didn't even exist. But now I'm located in Rotterdam. 75% of the students do not get in touch with sustainability or circularity. 75% of the students. So the whole system is not oriented towards the big challenges. So that is one of the big challenges we have, to transform that education system. These people have educated themselves and probably learned more in practice than at their studying period. That's a provocative statement, but let's say that's our experience with the Circularity Campus, that the students in 4 or 5 months learned more, they literally said, than in the 3-4 years at school.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
So one thing is to learn how to build sustainably, or to have a sustainability-focused field of study. But the other thing is to learn how to sell it to your client. So the market and the theory of sustainable building, putting those two together is the really difficult thing, I believe. And you don't get taught that at university.
I want to dive into the audience for questions. I'm going away from the speakers. I'm not sure whether it's the rain or me. Any questions from you guys? Raise your hand and I will try to find you with a microphone. Yes.
I have a question about which countries in the world do you believe are most advanced in terms of let's say next generation buildings?
I think we need to repeat the question.
So, which country in the world is the? You wanted to hear the question, or you want to give the answer? Okay, maybe you want to give the answer as well. Which country in the world is most ahead of us in terms of the discussion we are having tonight? Who wants to answer? Anybody in the audience as well? The possibility as well.
I think I can answer from my limited experience and then on a limited topic. So, carbon. I think what I notice is that we're all basically just trying to figure it out. So we have front runners in the Netherlands, in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, and everyone tries to claim they're the best. But in the end, I think you see a large community of people, so not countries but people, that have ideas, that try to implement them. And I think one of the most important things that is happening now with organizations like the Gideonsbende, like Built by Nature is another one, connecting these people and trying to unite them instead of, you know, competing against each other, who is the best bio-based builder, for example, but no, uniting them, learning from each other. I think that's the most important thing. But I'd say we are quite far as well, so.
Yeah, it depends on which aspect you are focusing on. If you look at bio-based building, then the Scandinavian countries are far ahead of us, but even Germany and Switzerland and Austria are far ahead of us. In general, the Netherlands is mediocre in terms of sustainable building. It's not a front runner, it's not a laggard, but you find all kind of nice examples in Italy, in France, in the UK, everywhere. It's not a competition. and remind my words, it's not about the building. You can produce endlessly sustainable buildings, but does it deliver a sustainable city or neighborhood? No, it's not a sum of, let's say, particular buildings. That's what I missed that slightly, the holistic view. There's still the focus on the buildings themselves.
They only took like 7 or 8 minutes, and you took like 45. Well, you were given 30, right? So
okay.
Be gentle. Any more questions from you guys? Don't be shy. Yeah.
So if discussing like the social change, the mental aspect, and Jan, you said like that we need 25% of people to move. Does our society exist of at least 25% people who want to move?
Well, first of all, if I want to penetrate in an organization like Duravermeer, I always start with the inner circle, the people who really want and are willing to change. That is mostly 5–10%. And then the second circle, the people who want but are not able, and then the third, and then the fourth layer. If I scale this up and I look globally or I look European-wise, I think we are close to the tipping point of 25%. Perhaps one more systemic crisis, and then we, all kind of empirical research shows that we can reach that 25%. At least in the Netherlands, we are close to that. Unlike the, let's say, nasty political climate, because transitions are seldomly driven by politics. Politics is always following and not leading. So you see in the change of mindset that it's going quite fast. All these people are part of movements like the ocean cleanup, the climate cleanup. There are hundreds of movements, and they are with millions worldwide. When I was their age, there were hardly any movements. There were real institutions, top down. So we really have seen that shift from the top-down hierarchical institutions to the more horizontal, let's say, and also a bit more, let's say, intangible networks and, let's say, communities.
Let me test that assumption with you guys. Do you get the sense that we are indeed near to a tipping point, whether it's 25% of the people working in construction or 25% of the architects or whatever? But do you have the feeling that you are part of a very big movement and that we are almost there or not?
There? Oh, sorry. I'm not sure. I feel like we're almost there. I feel like we still have a long way to go, but I do really see it growing compared to 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. There's more and more people who find this interesting. There's more and more design competitions where these sustainability principles are being favored. So I'd say we're building up to it, but it doesn't feel like we're almost there yet.
Margot?
Yeah. Hello. It always takes a while. Yeah. When we founded More Studio 4 years ago, one reason was that we didn't find any companies that did exactly what we wanted to do. Maybe that's still the case now, but there are now definitely more architecture firms that I'd want to be a part of. Like thinking back 4 years, where would I apply? I'd now have an easier time choosing if I look at sustainability than I had back then.
Yeah. Let's take some time for a couple of questions. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Frank Elsema. I live in Amsterdam North, and I started 10 years ago City Lab Buiksloterham Circular. And the mayor of Amsterdam, he didn't know what the word circular meant. Now I still live there, and I built my own home. But in the surrounding, I see a lot of buildings being built and a lot of tenders being won with green renders. But the fact is that the trees in the area are all collapsed because of these storms. They all collapsed because there's too much wind. The trees, they die because of too hot. The buildings, which are quite new, they are built in that way that they are too hot inside. So I live in this circular area. I see a lot of willing, but I see also the speed of the change of the climate in relation to the building, the circumstances. So I address a bit to Jan about that. How do you see that speed of change and the speed of the change of the buildings, which is maybe wood is okay, but there is too little wood to build. And the laws are still too slow, too low, to the speed of the changing of the laws to build that way, and the tenders to change. How do you see that relation between speed of change and the speed of the change of the climate?
I share your concern, but not the latter point. We have investigated if we would build, let's say, the whole demand for new houses all over Europe. There's enough production wood in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe to fulfill that. We don't really need to import that from all over the world or use tropical forests. So that I don't buy. But the first point I do, and therefore I'm pleading, don't focus too much on CO2 and the building, because a growing concern is that we are creating heat islands in the big cities. And there are all kinds of initiatives also in Rotterdam to lower that down by introducing green roofs, but also, let's say, trees. Also do that on the ground. That can save 5 or 10 degrees Celsius. 5, 10 degrees Celsius. And what you see is we have a lot of problem with forest because of the heavy rainfall and the big windstorms, that more than 40% of the forest in the Netherlands is vulnerable to that accelerating climate change. So that is a different dimension that also creeps into our cities. So you can green the city for good reasons, but it becomes a major part of climate adaptation. Otherwise, it will be terribly hot the coming decades in our cities. So we are forced to invest more into that. So greening is not so much a luxury, it is more an essential thing in order to create a livable environment which does not become too heat. That becomes a serious problem.
Yeah, if I may, there are a couple of questions left and we are out of time. So is your question not that bright, or what do you say? Oh, leave it at that. Is it a good question or not? If it is, let's do it. Because sorry. Here we go.
Because you were mentioning we need to focus on a social transition, because that's where it all starts. And I think we're kind of overlooking the social aspect within the last 20 minutes. So I was wondering if we're inspired, if we want to know more about this, do you have any good examples? Should we listen to podcasts you've participated in before, or how can we, ignite this spark to follow that path?
You're addressing to me? Yeah. Well, read books, listen to podcasts. I started the Neil podcast series together with Harm Edens on Neil leadership. I've been figurating in quite a few other podcasts. I'm all over to find at the internet, so I can speak one-to-one to you to give some really advice. There's a rich source. It's not only about me, but also other people who have an enormous amount of experience with the social dimension of transitions. A professor like John Green at the University of Amsterdam, but also at the University in Utrecht. There are well-known researchers, so I can provide you with a rich source of people and books and literature and podcasts, whatever. It's so rich that it is, let's say, for you, the challenge to pick the right ones out of it.
But you will receive a reading list at the bar.
Yeah.
I get it. Okay.
I have a very small question, actually. Margot, I think you mentioned the amount was 138 tons, 1,000 tons of CO2 per year, or total
per year.
Per year, yeah. So my question is that how do you stay motivated when, for example, you face a fact that in the first 60 days of war in a place on the planet, double that amount was emitted from demolishing the built environment while you're trying to, for example, recover it or transform it. So how do you keep up your motivation?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I think part of it is what Jan said in the end of his presentation to, I guess, not get overwhelmed, not get. I can't remember how you exactly said it, but anyway, so to keep some lightheartedness in it all. But the other thing is that I believe in focusing on something that you're good at. So I, for myself, know that I'm good at technical things. Within architecture, for example, I know that there are lots of architects that are much better at the social aspects and the aesthetics. So even within my field, I'm trying to focus. So I think this is something that is so far outside my field that I feel like I cannot influence it. I mean, in a very far way, in a political way, everybody has a democratic vote, but this is something that I don't feel like I can reach it, so yeah.
Yeah, I like the answer. I didn't like so much the question. It's a good question, but we are not responsible. You are not responsible for what is being destructed or demolished at several wars. It is pathetic enough, it is catastrophical, but come on, don't make it too heavy. Focus on what you can do, not focus on what you cannot do because you are not responsible for it. That's exactly my point. Don't make it too heavy. All these young people who are pessimistic, there's never ever been a successful transition that arose from pessimism. We need hope and optimism.
And
a lot
of booze, which will be offered in a minute. Is there any last question that has to be posed? Let's do it.
Yeah. Maybe a question to Jan, because you mentioned the very important point of difference between project success and scalable success, and the bottom-up 25%. But do you see, viewing the urgency and the time remaining, success without the top-down policy change? Because yes, you could have the bottom-up enthusiasm and the role models, but do you see an escape without the top-down policy mandate, which is becoming also with the current landscape even not that positive?
Yeah, and that's a good point. If I look at it globally, I see a driving force that is relatively new, namely strategic autonomy. Every big global player wants to become autonomous. China, the US, Europe. Look at the recent Draghi report. You can think of it what you want, but that's another plea for strategic autonomy. And that is a really important driver behind the energy transition and the sustainability transition. So I think because of that geopolitical playing field that is arising, that we will reach soon that 25%. Other reason than I thought 10, 20 years ago. Because then sustainability was the real driver and self-sufficiency. But now it's really about, if you are not really accelerating the transition, then you lose power. And then you lose the battle and the game. So because of that power reason, one of my PhDs, let's say, did research into power and transitions, Flor Avellino, read their beautiful articles and books. This has turned into a power game and struggle. And cynically enough, that helps us in order to accelerate. If Europe doesn't accelerate the energy transition, we are losing power to the US and China. China has turned into the green engine. The green engine. They are producing more wind and solar than all the other countries together in the world. And that happened over the last 10 years. Not because they want to achieve the climate goals, but they want to build up strategic autonomy.
I want to thank you for joining us under these harsh circumstances. Please stay with us a little while longer, be it at the bar or checking out the exhibition, which will be on display, I think, until this weekend, right, Willem? Take the microphone, nobody can hear you.
Sunday is the last day of the exhibition. Monday, if you slip into the building, you can actually still see it. Maybe I should also announce the next 2 editions, if you don't mind. October 1st, in the institute, the new institute, in the framework of the IABR of Saskia and her team, the new edition will be called Learning from Paris. I think France is really doing well. And in Paris, there's a lot of very good examples. And 28th of November, we hope to organize a new edition here in the hall, which is called The Value of Carbon, featuring, among others, Sacha Brons once more.
Thanks, Willem, from Group A's CarbonLab, and thank you for Jan. Yeah.
Like a clash of generations. I'm so proud of these people, and that is my hope. That these people are working on, let's say, the further basis of the transition. And at the age of 22, 25, almost 30, and they are with millions. So it was not a clash of generations. We need to learn from each other. I've learned this evening from them, they hopefully from mine. That is how it should work. Not a clash at all. We need each other.
Okay, thanks for being here with us. Sam, Sacha, Margot en Jan, geef ze een groot applaus. Dankjewel.